All right, everybody, welcome to the Gear Up Parenting Series. This is class number 3. We're going to be talking about building self-worth and why it's important. My name is Chris Pender. This is what I do for a living. I work with every population from preschool to prison. Done it all. I have my own organization called FAMCOM, Families, Communities on the Move. I run summer camps. I design after-school programs. I run parenting programs, fatherhood programs. I have a podcast with my 2 sons called Above Average Black Men. So I kind of got my hands in a lot of stuff. This is one of my favorite things, working with parents and working with adults and young people. Matter of fact, I'm in Norristown High School, both middle schools and alternative school. I do restorative circles. So you can say I work with everybody. So tonight we're gonna be talking about building self-worth and why it's important. So I'm gonna give this to you 3 ways. I know you came for the parenting aspect of it, but I'm gonna give it to you 3 ways. Parenting, yourself, and relationships. And I'll tie it together why it's important. The reason why I say relationships, because this is something you have to model for your kids. You know, this is something that you have to be active in doing. You just can't say be. You know, they got to see you doing it. They have to see you talking to your spouse or significant other. They got to see you doing the same stuff. Our kids learn better by what we do. That is the best education our kids get, other than what we say. So I think we have to understand that. The last 2 classes I talked about how social media is dominating our kids right now. It is. Social media, man, is killing them, man. And because it's visual. We live in a generation that's visual. That's just the reality of it all. They don't take good notes. You know, they're not getting lecture styles. This is visual. So as we go through this, I want you to think about it. You know, what does self-worth look like? Kind of in my own research, one thing I really discovered, and you probably can speak to it better than I can, is I never realized how defining high school was as far as people when they become adults. Until I started hanging out with folk I went to high school with. It's like, wait a minute. You know, he or she acts the same way they acted in high school. The cheerleader still acts like the cheerleader. You know, because that became the identity. The cool dude still trying to act like the cool guy because that was his identity, because self-worth is so important. It is so important. So as we go through this, I want you to think about it. Think about your own journey. And what is self-worth? As you can see here, you see a bunch of words over there that talks about it: fully alive, completely enough, connected to all, my heart's desire, you know, the love I seek. Self-worth is so many things, man. It's self-esteem versus self-concept equals self-worth. How you see yourself is important. I've done workshops in halfway houses with females who are some of the most beautiful women I've ever saw, and they believed they were ugly because some guy told them they were ugly. I work with kids all the time who think they're not smart because some teacher called them dumb. Somebody respect said they were dumb, so they believe they're dumb. You know, every one of us has a story that we can tell where somebody says something negative to us or about us. We have to make a decision, are we going to allow that to define us? Unfortunately, a lot of our young people are being defined by it. Unfortunately, a lot of relationships are being defined by things that happened long before the relationship. Think of it this way. I have a Volkswagen. My wife has 10 suitcases, I have 10 suitcases. We meet, you're not cramming all 20 suitcases in the Volkswagen. So you start throwing stuff out. You start throwing stuff out. Lo and behold, 5 years later, you start unpacking some of those bags. You have no idea what's in the rest of those suitcases. So you deal with people who maybe somebody's father called them dumb or stupid, and you joking around say, hey, what are you, dumb or stupid? You strike a nerve. It's not that big a deal to you, but you just tapped into somebody's self-esteem, how they see themselves, long before you got there. So there's a history that we have to make sure we think about as we talk about self-esteem. Self-worth is a combination of self-esteem and self-concept. How do you see yourself? What are you worth? You don't have to answer, but that's really, really important. What are you worth? Because I got news for you. If you don't see the value in yourself, how are you going to teach your kids to see the value in themselves? If you don't see the value in yourself, how do you expect others to value you? So even in our relationships, we got to make sure we're affirming and validating each other. I work with men, and there's so many men who's afraid to say, I love you. They just weren't raised that way. So the wife will say, I love you, and they'll say, me too. And the wife is like, wait a minute, I'm waiting to hear those words. You know, or they'll say, you know how I feel. Why? Because they don't understand the value of being affirmed. However, we all know men, and I'm one, so I can say it. You know, we want to make sure we appreciate it. We want to make sure that we're being told that we're valuable, that, you know, thank you. You know, we want to be appreciated. So you see how this whole self-esteem works and self-work? So we got to make sure when we're talking to our kids, you let your kids know they have value. Because I can tell you this, whoever places a value on your child is going to now be the leader and have control. Because that child is going to keep looking for that affirmation. They're going to keep looking for that person who says, you're handsome, you're smart, you're pretty, whatever it is, and it becomes like a drug. And if you're not giving it to them, they're going to go somewhere to get it. That's just the reality of it all. Why do you think we have so many followers now? Because they're looking to be affirmed. It's not even about right or wrong, it's you make me feel good. So therefore, when I'm with you, I'm going to do whatever it takes to keep this relationship. It's like a person that gets involved in a domestic violence situation. Leave. That's the first thing people think. But they're addicted to the relationship. That person has now established their value, and if you believe I'm the only one who cares about you, you're not going to be able to give it up so fast. So we got to make sure, even with our kids, that they understand they have value, that they're important. They may not be the smartest, they may not be the prettiest, they may not be the best athlete, but they have value. You got to make sure you let them know that you value them, and it's important. Self-esteem describes feelings about oneself. We see the words up there. Self-concepts describes thoughts about oneself. How do you think about yourself? There's a lot of people who walk around every day and smile and don't think high of themselves. There's a lot of people who I know, who I work with, whether I'm trying to hire them, whether in a group or something, when you look at them, they look like they got it all together, but the more you engage them in the conversation, they don't see themselves like that. They don't see themselves as having it all together, and they have negative thoughts about themselves. Did you know suicide is at an all-time high now? In all ethnic groups, all age groups, it's at gender, whatever, it's an all-time high now. There's a lot of people who don't see the value in themselves. And I go back, I start with social media. Social media has done a good job of establishing, for young people especially, what their value is. Because they look at social media and they see somebody they don't know, never heard from, have no idea if it's true or not, and this person says, this is what pretty looks like. This person says, this is what smart is. This person says, this is what cool is, and they get sucked into it. We had a young lady here last week who shared that she had an issue with social media, a grown lady, because she said she would look at it, and her friends would put up all this great stuff they were doing. And she felt so bad because she wasn't experiencing any of that. So she had to get off. So we got to make sure, man, that we're not being influenced and our kids are not being influenced by it. You know how many couples I sit down to counsel and their relationship is being driven by social media? Because on social media, he's doing this for his wife, she's doing that for her husband. Everything they read and everything they move off is being focused off of social media. So we got to make sure, man, that we're establishing our kids with a foundation to have good thoughts about themselves. And we supply that first. Long before they get to school, if they're in school, you got to make sure you're doing that. Especially with our young ladies. You got to make sure that you're telling your daughters. You know, my daughter, she's grown now, but I took her on her first date. I was the first man to give her a dozen roses. I made sure I took her to a decent restaurant. So somebody couldn't come along and influence her with all this nice stuff that she never had before. And because if she wasn't quite sure who she was, she attached that to her worth. Oh, he must really like me a lot because he's spending money on me. You know, same thing with guys. Oh, if I like her, I got to spend a lot of money on her. So I made sure my sons understood that, you know, you can't buy affection. You can't buy somebody to care about you. But it all starts with how you see yourself. So we got to make sure, you know, that we're telling our kids this. Self-worth is the way people think and feel about themselves. There's a lot of people who associate, look at all the people in this country that go into debt because they think if they buy a new car, if I keep up, you know what I'm talking about, if I keep up with the Joneses, I got a new car, I can't afford it. But I got to have the appearance like I got my stuff all together. So I'm buying new cars I can't afford. I'm buying clothes that I really can't afford. I'm getting my hair done, my nails done, haircut, whatever it is, and I can't afford it. However, I want people to think I got it all together. Meanwhile, I'm crying myself to sleep at night. You know, meanwhile, you know, my house is a wreck in the inside because I'm living in chaos. But when I leave my house, I got the appearance. So how you see yourself is valuable. Even in a relationship, you have to make sure if your relationship is healthy, you see value in each other. You understand the value each of you have. It's not about being perfect. I'm doing a workshop tonight for a bunch of guys. It's called Unconditional Love. How men should love their spouses and girlfriends. And that's one of the things we're going to talk about is, you got to love yourself before you can love somebody else. Because if I don't love me, how can I love you? If I see flaws in myself, how can I not see flaws in you? Because human nature is to not let people get beyond you. If we're in a relationship, my human nature is, who you think you are. Because we haven't been taught different. So I don't see my value, so I'm going to tear you down. So now we go and talk about kids, the same thing. We got to teach our kids that people cannot drive them by names they call them. So many kids I'll sit down with in school because somebody called them ugly, because somebody called them too dark, or somebody called them too light, that they're getting in trouble. Because somebody else is driving the narrative because I want to fit in. Because I don't know my value, so now I allowed somebody to establish my value, so I got to do whatever I got to do to make sure I'm still cool with this person. Just look around in society, what's happening right now. We got a lot of people doing a lot of things that they don't even know why they do it, because they want to fit in. And I don't care who you are, you want to fit in. So we got to make sure, man, that we're teaching our kids this. 3 primary sources that I think we got to pay attention to. One is family. Family sets the tone first. How you treat your kids in the house, how you treat your spouse or significant other, that sets the tone, because you're modeling this behavior for if you got kids, they're watching you. I have 3 grown children. They can go back and tell you all kind of stuff I said and did when I was around them. I have a 4-year-old grandson right now who repeats whatever I do. He repeats what I do. That young lady right there is being shaped and molded, by things that you do in front of her. So we got to make sure that we're good role models. We got to make sure as a family that we're modeling the right stuff. How are you talking to your significant other when your kid is around? You can't call your wife or your husband, boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever, a bunch of names and expect your kid not to be impacted by that. We got to make sure. Because I've dealt with people who call their wives a bunch of names, then turn around and told their daughter, you look just like your mom. How many times have you heard that? So we got to make sure, man, that we managing the family well. We're careful about what we say, what we do. In school is a heavy influence on our kids. And I'm not coming at teachers, so if you're watching this, I always get in trouble for this one. But there's a lot of teachers who say stuff to kids that they shouldn't say. And a lot of kids are so influenced by teachers because they see the teacher as authority. I remember when I was in the 7th grade, a teacher told me that I talked too much, so I was never going to amount to anything. And those were the teachers that had a lot of respect for her. A lot of respect for her. And it crushed me. Luckily I had a mom and dad, that was having none of that. So they made sure that I was able to bounce back from that. But suppose I hadn't. Suppose my mom and dad didn't think enough or didn't know enough to pour into it and help me through that point in time. Who knows what I would have become? Who knows? Saturday I went to a picnic with my people I graduated from high school. So we've been in high school since 1979. I know that's a long time for y'all, but look at our eyebrows. You say, yeah, but it's funny because when I look around and I see them, so many of them are shaped by high school. They are. Cheerleaders still got that same cheerleader personality. We kind of passed that stage, which I think is safe to say. The cool dude is still trying to be the cool dude. And then I had to stop and think about it. High school shapes many of us so much because that's the time where they say it's supposed to be the best time of your life. But nobody ever tell us that is the most influential time for our kids who don't fit in. So now all of a sudden they grow up thinking I'm not worth it because I wasn't fitting in high school. I deal with adults now who are in relationships scarred from stuff that happened in high school. So it's because what happens is, let me back up, if we're not counteracting what society is saying about our kids, if we're not working with our kids, show them they have value, show them that regardless of what 3 or 4 or 5 people say may think may be cool, how do they know? How do they know? And how many of us actually have those conversations with our kids, about how you see yourself? I'll ask people in professional setting, one of the first questions I ask when I do workshops in corporate America is, can you tell me who you are without using your name or title? 90% of the people can't. They can't. If they can't say doctor, pastor, lawyer, so-and-so, they cannot describe who they are. Whatever your name is, if I change your name to Ralph, it would not change who you are. The essence of who you are wouldn't stay the same. Now, but let me ask you a question. If you don't know who you are, what happens? You begin to act like Ralph. You think Ralph act. And that's happening to so many people in relationships, kids, because they don't have high self-esteem. Community is another place where you see groups of kids in community starting to do stuff. I don't know if you've been paying attention to the news, especially in Philly, they going crazy. one kid to do something and a whole bunch of kids just jump right on. TikTok is kind of is crazy because kids will see something in TikTok and they just start acting on it, whether it's wrong or right. Because that is TikTok, social media is setting the temperature for a lot of our kids because nobody established their value for them. So now if I want to be worth something, I got to do this TikTok thing because I want to fit in with everybody else. I want to be like everybody else. But as parents, as adults, we got to start counteracting that. And again, it starts in how are you modeling in your home with your relationships with your significant other? What kind of conversations are you having? What kind of conversations are you having on the phone when you think nobody and your kids are listening? Are you having in the front seat while you're driving? What kind of conversations do you have with your kids about they do have value? Sometimes as parents, we don't know it, but we actually teach our kids they don't have value because we buy them a lot of nice stuff, like they got to keep up with the Joneses too. We got to put them in all this nice stuff thinking this is going to make a difference. Instead of saying, it's nice to get, I like nice stuff too, but also we got to tell them this stuff doesn't define who you are. The kind of person you are is not going to be tied to whether you got new sneaks or the latest gear. We got to make sure to understand that the value comes from within. We got to make sure that we're sharing that. And the community is a tough place. A child's feelings of self-worth is developed from the treatment growing up. And I say it all the time. You can't call a kid dumb, stupid, a bunch of names around the house and think you're going to go to school and be this great student. How many times have you heard, what's wrong with you? Something must be wrong with you. This is what you're saying to your kid. So if you say that over and over and over again to a kid who he idolizes you, he begins to think something must be wrong with me because my mama keeps saying something is wrong with me. My dad keeps asking me what's wrong with me. And most people who say that don't say it with ill intent because it's one of those generational things. My mama said it to me, so we just pass it down. Nobody thinks to correct it. Nobody stops to think, how did I feel when that was said to me? We just keep doing it. So we got a bunch of kids thinking something is wrong with them. So we got to make sure, man, that we, as best we can, we try to give our kids positive experience about how we treat them, the words we use around them. And we talk about the early years, we know that. When you have kids, some of you may know, not some of you, I don't know if you remember the game Simon Says. You probably did. You ever heard of that? Oh, cool. Well, she's laughing like, really? But no, I say it because for kids, it's like Simon Says. I hear what you're saying, but I'm watching what you're doing. It's kind of like you tell your kids don't lie. And then somebody called the house, you tell them, say I'm not home. It's small, but you just told them to lie. Don't answer the door. We not here. But it's small. And it's meaningless. Or my favorite is, you walking around the supermarket eating, not paying for something, you wonder why your kids steal. They hear you telling them that stealing is wrong, but they're watching you do it. So we have to make sure when we're building self-worth, man, that we're leading by example. We got to make sure, man, even in the relationships, how are you investing in your relationship? My wife and I, we have date night. That's just, we can't cancel unless we both agree with it. My kids have heard me, my grandson, which cracks me up, he hears me tell my wife, you're beautiful. Thank you. I appreciate you. He hears us having that exchange. So he's comfortable with it. At 4 years old, he'll say that to his mother. Now, adversely, if he heard me start calling names, that's what he's going to learn to say to his mom. So we wonder why some of these boys don't respect their moms or don't respect women. It starts in a house. Because they're watching people they admire. They're watching people who they respect. And they're picking it up. And then let's not even talk about social media and the movies, the media we expose our kids to. So it's the same thing. So we got to make sure, man, that from the earliest ages as possible, man, we're putting positive role models out there. Positive experience equals positive self-esteem and self-concept. Simplified program. Negative experience equals negative esteem and self-concept. Whatever you feed is going to grow stronger. You'll hear me say this in all my workshops. Whatever you feed is going to go stronger. So if think of your kid as a blank canvas. Never been painted on, never been written on. You're painting on it. So whatever color you use the most is the color that's going to dominate. So whatever you feed this young person over a period of time is going to dominate. So if you tear them down by calling them names all the time, you can't do anything right. You can never do what I ask you to do. You say all this stuff to them, and you're wondering why they think like that about themselves. I deal with adults right now who I can tell the kind of child they have because they won't do anything unless you explain it to them, because they just shell-shocked. Because they're so afraid of making a mistake, so they won't even try. They'll just bring it back to you, say, hey, can you, what about this? And you say, well, just go ahead. Oh, no, I don't want to make a mistake. How many adults do you know like that? Because they've been shell-shocked, because early ages, they've been probably verbally penalized for making a mistake. So why am I going to try now? Because that's in my mind. So we got to make sure, man, that we're loading up on positive experiences. Let's look at the effects. Positive, feel accepted, makes friends easily, has leadership qualities, accepting of constructive criticism, compassionate towards others, is self-confident, feels proud of abilities, thinks good about themselves, believes in themselves. Look at the negative, self-destructive tendencies. If I don't value myself, what do I have to lose? I've been doing some work in a high school with some of these kids in summer school. And one of the questions I'll ask them is, why are you here? You know how many kids told me because they don't care? Think about that. I don't care in the 9th grade. I don't care. So a person who doesn't care is a dangerous person because they have nothing to lose. Nothing to lose. So we got a bunch of kids walking around with nothing to lose. Less confidence. I just talked about people who won't try stuff because they're afraid to make a mistake. Some people have been trapped on a job for 20 years because they're afraid to try something different. They're afraid to apply for another job. They complain, they're misery, they hate it, but they're not going to do anything different because they don't have the confidence. Less happiness. If you don't have confidence and you stuck in something that's not making you happy, how are you going to be happy? That's like if you get trapped in a relationship and the relationship is not going where you want it to go. It could be, maybe you have aspiration and dreams, to go on and do different things, to do great things. And maybe he or she doesn't. You're miserable because you're not doing what you really want to do, but you don't leave because you think you're not going to get anything better. How many times have you seen that play out? This is as good as it gets. The least favorite saying I hate hearing, and I'm from the hood, is, at least I'm not as bad as so-and-so. No idea where that came from, but that's what you hear over and over. That's the barometer when somebody measures themselves. At least I'm not as bad as so. Think about that. Think about how powerful that is. So just think about for a second, man, if you could just view yourself in a positive light, and we could teach our kids to. They believe they're powerless to change anything. That kind of self-explanatory. They're being a people pleaser. Again, we talked about that. We got so many young people doing what other people doing, playing Simon Says, follow the leader. I used to do workshops in Chester, SEI, the State Corrections Institute of Chester, and there were so many people in there because they were with their friends, just hanging out with their friends. In high school, kids in summer school because they failed their class. Well, how come you didn't fail? Because I didn't go to class. How come you didn't go to class? I was hanging out with my friends. Oh, I knew it was wrong, but they missed a whole lot of class time hanging out with their friends. Why? Because they're people pleasers. Because if you don't value yourself, you go along to get along. And I'm not going to read them word from word. Struggle with relationships, speaks for itself, lack self-care, lower resilience, obsession with perfection, difficulty getting motivated. And they may have a few of those things and may not have all of them. But these are characteristics of people who typically don't see themselves, as being valuable. Let's look at people with high self-esteem. Any questions or comments? This is open dialogue. This is not, you got to be quiet until the end. Anything you want to add or? Yes, ma'am.
So, you mentioned a lot about.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm getting out the way of the camera.
I'm sorry. A lot about, some of the things that influence our children. And one of them was school, community, home. While we can control somewhat what's happening at home, we have no control over that. How do we? If we see at the schools, we're not valuing our children, they're not improving their self-worth, they're just putting them down and doing the wrong thing, how do we as parents, what do we do? How do we get that to change? We
talked about that last week in How to Raise a Positive Child in a Negative World. We got to have communication. We got to have conversations with our child. I do the same thing with my grandson. When my kids were little, and they going to practice or whatever. My daughter, we had a date night. We would just go to the mall. It wasn't always about spending money. We would just hang out and talk. With my kids, we playing basketball. My sons, we just shoot. We just talk. When they came home from school, hey, how was your day? What happened today? If they had a different personality than I was used to, hey, what's going on? You got to be, you got to take control of that. We can't control what happened in school, but we can help deprogram and offset a lot of stuff when they come home. Make home a safe place. You can't be the parent that every time your child says something you don't like, you screaming and howling and you throwing stuff all over the place. No, sometimes you got to suck it up and say, hey, I can't tell you to be honest and share with me. And then soon you say something I don't like, I'm blowing up because now she's laughing. But you know what I'm talking about. How likely are you to come back to me after that? You're not. So we got to make sure as parents, we got to suck it up too sometimes and say, hey, I can't say be honest and tell me something. And then my daughter comes to me and says, Dad, I really like this boy. What the? And I'm starting going off. You kind of, that's the stuff we have to do as parents. And see, while we're doing that, having those conversations, we're empowering them too. Because we give them the ability to make decisions. And that's the key, because you don't want your kid to be a kid their whole life. You don't want your kid being 40 years old coming back to you, asking you, hey, what about this? What about that? What about that? You want them to be free to go out and do stuff. Yeah, you want them to have the communication. That's the flip side that I talked about last week. When you start talking to your kids when they're young, when they get older, they'll keep talking to you. People will come to me and says, man, my kid is 14 years old, he don't talk to me. Well, were you talking to him when he was 8? When he was 10? How are you talking to him? My kids are grown. My youngest is 29, my oldest is 35. We go out to dinner like once a month. We all get together, go out to dinner, we'll take a vacation together. And people says, well, how did you do that? There was no magic elixir. I just talked to them. We always talked. And honestly, I got it because my dad didn't do it with me. And I knew how I felt. And because my dad wasn't talking to me, I didn't always see myself as, I was good in sports, real good in sports. And people used to say, well, I was good in sports because they thought I wanted to turn pro. No, I was good in sports because I just wanted attention. That was my way of getting information. Everybody can't play sports. Everybody's not going to have something to get information. So we got to make sure we're doing it. We got to make sure we're doing it, man. Parents who value their own worth can more easily value the worth of their children. I just said that. How do you value yourself? You can't walk around saying I'm dumb, I'm stupid. And check this out. It's not always what you do what you say that establishes your value. How are you treating yourself? That's the big one too. You can't be disheveled all the time looking like you just fell off the back of the turnip truck, telling your kids to value yourself and you're not taking care of yourself. You can't. You got to make sure you're taking care of yourself. And it's not about being perfect, but show that you love yourself. Act like you love yourself. I've always told my kids, when you walk in the room like you own a joint. It's not about what you say or who cares, but you got to walk in the room like, I don't care whatever y'all say about me, it don't matter because I know who I am. That's the way that's what you got to tell your kids. You got to build self-worth up so people are not dictating to them. Especially as women, it's tough because people will size you up what you look like. And they'll make a determination the first 5-10 minutes you're in the room. So what happens if you walk in there like this? Same thing, I hire people. Somebody walk in there for the job interview like that, man, they ain't got a shot. And I'm not being sarcastic, but how are you gonna work, for somebody else and you're gonna represent the company and you can't even represent yourself well? So it impacts us in so many ways, man. And we gotta teach our kids that. You teach them to hold their head up when they're talking to people. You teach them to look people in the eye when they're having a conversation. You teach them to shake hands. You teach them to walk in the room and say, hey, hello, good morning, goodbye, whatever. You teach them those things because it builds confidence. And this is what self-worth is about. It's about helping your kids build confidence. High self-worth serves as a motivational function by making it more likely that a person will take care of themselves and explore their full potential. Key thing, full potential. We're all born with so much potential, with tremendous potential. Nobody's born with more potential than somebody else. What happens is successful people understand how to tap into their potential. Successful people understand that I have certain gifts and talents that make me unique. I got to figure out how to get this out. Unsuccessful people, we just go along and get along. I go back. Teacher told me I talk too much. I could have just stopped talking. I get paid pretty good to talk now. I'm being honest. I get paid a nice amount to talk now. I set my own hours. I do what I want to do. Run my own business. But just think about it and listen to him. How my whole life would have been different. Just think about how somebody's opinion can impact your whole life and you don't even realize it. Think about that with your kids now who are young. If you have young kids, the power we have as parents to instill in them. My daughter's grown. My daughter's 32 years old. I still call her princess. I still treat her like that. I treat her with the utmost respect. They'll tell you. You know, they laugh and joke. They, you know, because I make sure I treat their mom the same way whenever they're around. I treat like that anyway, but I make sure they see that. I make sure my sons see that. So as they progress and think about getting married, that they treat their fiancés or whoever the same way. At the same time, not losing the value in themselves to the point where somebody's leading them around now, making them do things they don't really want to do. So we got to make sure. We got to make sure, man. Anybody else? That was good. Questions, comments, anybody? You set up when I said that. Is nothing you want to say? Oh, all right. Can we improve your self-worth? Yes. I hear people say, no, yeah, we can. Because self-worth is a state of mind. And what I tell kids is, or parents, kids, couples, when I'm working with couples, do things to build up your confidence. Do little things to build up your confidence. Like, for instance, don't go out and get a logarithm if you don't know math and think that's going to, you want to do this logarithm. No, you know, start with 2 plus 2. Because you know what 2 plus 2. You know what 4 plus 4. Start with small stuff to build your confidence up so you can get used to it. You know, if you don't think you're attractive, get dressed up once or twice a week. Just because. Who cares? Just because. You know, get dressed up, walk down to Dunkin' Donuts. It don't matter. But just build up your confidence. Little things like that that can make you build up your confidence. It's the same thing with our kids. You know, if your kid doesn't do well on the test, we're gonna do better next time. Hey, in the older, let's take a look at how you study it. How can we work through this process? What can we do different? Because check this out. Your child may just be a C student. That may be the reality of it all. As much as you want them to be an A student, they may just be a C student. So you don't want to call them, oh, you dummy, you underachiever. No. Because I can tell you this, C students rule the world. I have not yet met anybody 4.0 and they ain't charge anything. I got people work for me, they 4.0. I wasn't close to being a 4.0. But I can solve problems. You know, I know how to think critically. You know, so you got to make sure, man, that sometimes we got to recognize and build in self-worth. Our kids are what they are. Okay, so how can I build upon that? You know, how can I, yes.
I was thinking about what you were saying, and I was actually thinking about the question that you asked a few minutes ago. And in thinking about self-worth and what you were saying, I think it's also really important as parents to really get into your child's, because like you said, a lot of self-worth is determined by what is happening in school. Meet your kids' teachers, go to school night, and find out and really connect with the people that are pouring into your students. Because I have found that going in, introducing myself, introducing my kids to them, because I'm like, hey, you're new to them. Let me give you some tidbits about what you need to do to sort of work well with them this year. But it also gives you an insight into where they're at and what they are pouring into your child. And you then have the revelation of, okay, this is going to be someone that is going to work well with my child. This may potentially be somebody that I can just sort of tell, you know, this is somebody that I really need to be more on top of, or ask my child more questions about, how are you and Miss Smith getting along? Checking in with Miss Smith. How are you and my son, you know, how are you all doing? Is he posing any challenges? And I only say that because in high school I had an experience, I had a college guidance counselor, and I thought that people thought that the sun rose in her eyes, and that she was the key to getting you into college. So if college was where you wanted to be, you had to go through her to get there. And what she said about you is what you believed. And I remember the day I walked in and she said to me, I said, you know, I really want to look at schools that have pre-med programs. And she laughed at me. And she said, Have you seen your math and science grades?
Ooh.
Why don't you focus on helping people as a social worker? And do you know what I am today, 40 years later? I'm a social worker. Because I believe this person, who I believe was in a position of influence, of authority. And if she said that's what I should be, that's what I should be.
You stole my thunder.
And it's, I mean, it has been a wonderful, rewarding career, but I do wonder.
What if?
What if? What if I had said, yeah, I'm not the strongest math and science student, but I have other things to, to offer. So I would just, in speaking to that, really spend time getting to know the people that are pouring into your children and make sure that it really lines up with what you want to be poured into them. Because sometimes just because they are teachers and just because they are guidance counselors or in positions of where that's what they're supposed to do, is guide them in the right direction. Sometimes they don't even mean it.
Because most times they don't even know the kid because they're dealing with so many kids. And you just stole my thunder. Great story though, because I went through something similar with my daughter. My daughter goes down until she was good in basketball. My son was good in basketball before her. She goes down to the guidance counselor, and the guidance counselor tell her that she shouldn't go to college. That's my dream and my wife's dream. So, needless to say, when she called me up and told me that, it didn't take me long to get to the school. But she told my daughter she should be a cook. My daughter couldn't even boil an egg. And I'm thinking to myself, like, what? I'm seriously, at that time, she couldn't even boil an egg. And I'm thinking to myself, like, what? And I went up there, we got into this long conversation, and I remember her telling me that I don't understand. So then I had to lay my credentials on the table. Lady, I got a master's degree. I am educated. I'm not walking around with a thing on my head, so we go back and forth. Needs to say, my daughter graduated college. She's a philanthropist for Capital One. She's doing very well for herself.
She's not a cook.
She can't cook. And then the other thing about it is, cooks don't make money, chefs make money.
Right.
A cook, and there's a difference. Just because you put tomato on a grilled cheese sandwich don't make you a chef.
Right.
So to your point, those decisions, man, people could say stuff about you that if you take, can change your whole life. Can change your whole life. And regardless how your life turn out, you always wonder about what if. It's just something that haunts you, man. And I will say this, you don't have to be great at something to become something. For instance, I was not the greatest English person in the world, but I have 2 books. I got a curriculum. People pay to hear me come out and speak. Now, if you want to check my commas and semicolons, hey, bless you. Just long as the comma's in the right place on it, hey, long as that comma's in the right place on the check, I could care less. Because I know who I am. And typically people who are overcritical, they're lacking themselves. So I'm going to take it out on you because I want to make you feel bad because I feel bad. So we have to be careful when people do that to us. Because my final comment to the lady was, well, you went to college. So how are you going to say and tell someone else, don't go to college? You where you are because you went to college. So that's a great story, but that's why we got to be careful. And the thing is, there's one more part to that. By you going up to the school, you let your teachers know that you are your child's advocate.
Yes.
My teachers knew. All my kids' teachers knew. It was so funny because when my youngest got down there, the first day of school, she called him to the office. Hey, what college you want to go to? She was not having this conversation again.
I already know, right?
So you got to remember, you are their biggest advocate, and teachers need to know that, hey, if I challenge you, your son or daughter, that you're going to be up there. That and I'm not coming up there ready to fight, but I'm going to advocate for my child. I want the best for my child.
I think it's a lot harder, or it's different now. I have children ranging from 25 to 8.
God bless you.
I have 5 of them. And I have a 13-year-old son.
Mm-hmm.
I've been in school and I've been advocating. And I noticed that in the schools now, the guidance counselors ain't guiding them.
Yeah.
Like it's I hate to say it, but there's more people in a teaching position at some of these schools that don't even care about the kids. And I advocate a lot for my kid, for anybody's kid. If it's a problem and I can't help or I can't advocate, I'm there. But it's like they're just hiring people who have no...
You go to the principal. You go to the principal. If you don't get resolution with the principal, you go to the superintendent. That's your right as a parent. I made sure the principals knew who I were. And the principals did not want to see me. So they knew. They made sure that whenever I came into school, everything okay, Mr. Printer, everything, they made sure because they knew I was going to go to the next step. And the guidance council teachers knew if I didn't get satisfaction, I was going to the principal. So when you advocate, sometimes you got to go the extra mile. And it is different because I'm in the schools. I see the difference. And part of it is, unfortunately, parents are different. But that's why you got to make sure your children know who they are. That they don't allow somebody to define them. They don't allow somebody to say, because let's go back to social media. Social media determines, or the media in general determines what's pretty. They determines what's fashionable. There's certain type of women you will never see. One of my favorite things is, you ever watch a beer commercial? Every woman in the beer commercial is perfect. Hair is perfect, teeth is perfect, flat abs and everything. You're not hanging in no bar drinking no beer and you got a flat stomach. It just is not happening. It is not happening. No, but that's the image they sell because they know how powerful the media is.
Funny, I never thought about that.
Yeah, think about it. Think about cars. You see certain body types on cars. I mean, look at the Super Bowl. You could just get finished eating. You sit down and watch the Super Bowl. By halftime, you're hungry. You're thirsty. Why? Because all these food commercials just coming on after, over and over and over. If you ever go to New York City, you see the billboards all over the place. Everything is lit up. They don't have paper billboards. They got all. Why? Because they know people are sight. We're sight, visual, and sound now. We're visual and sound now. So they know that. So they play the advertisement. Advertisers know that. We just don't know it. They know it. It's almost like smells. We can smell something, like maybe your grandmother made a pie or something. When you smell that pie, you know you're home. You do. It's like when I was in college and I came home Thanksgiving, when I started smelling, hey, they making fresh cookies, I knew that smell. My wife, she wears a lot of perfumes. So if I go to the mall and I smell, I'm looking for it because that smell is in my head. Forget that they made sold 1 million bottles and inspired 1 million other people, but that scent is in my head. So, our kids are being, for lack of a better term, programmed. So we have to take better control. But again, we got to know who we are. We got to be confident. Because I have parents tell me, well, I don't want to do that because my kid is going to grow up arrogant. Just because you know who you are does not make you arrogant. It's okay. We got to stop thinking that. It doesn't make you arrogant. It makes you self-assured. And if you want to be successful, you need to be self-assured. We have kids their self-esteem is so low, the first time they hear no is over and done. For instance, I'm going to tell you how bad it is. I just had this conversation today. I am not a participation trophy fan, by any means. I am not the guy that you get a trophy just for being on the team. I despise that. I despise that. That drives me crazy. Yeah, my summer camp, they had a contest. Who could design the doors the best? So they came back to me today and they said, it's only 6 doors, mind you. We had 3 ties for first place and 3 ties for second place. It's impossible. It's impossible. Yeah, she's looking around. So I said, you mean to tell me 50% of the people in this contest won? That happens nowhere else in life. So what are you teaching kids by saying, just show up? Fast forward, I hire people who think they just got to just show up. Hey, I'm just going to show up. I'm not going to do anything. So, so how does that help somebody by never letting them know, working through what it's like to work through a difficult time, what it's like to work through a challenge? Some of our kids go to college, you got to come back home because we don't teach them how to work through challenging times. So the first time something comes up, they come back. I don't take care of grown people. How many people come back home because they can't, not because of an emergency, because they just can't cut it? I had a girl tell me today, she's never going to see this video, she says, my life is tough. I pay a bill. I was like, what? She pays a bill.
That's what they say. Adulting is hard.
But if we don't teach them, how do they know different? And if you don't teach somebody that just because you get in a bad situation, or you make a bad choice, it does not make you a bad person. How do they learn the difference? How do they learn to disassociate themselves with what's happening to them and who they are? They don't. So we got to make sure, man. And this it just takes us right into labels. We got to be careful of labels, man, that we give kids. You know, it amazes me when I see somebody 60 years old and they still calling them stinky. You know, that's a label he got. That's a label he got as a kid, so people still call him stinky. You know, I just think it's funny how labels stick. However, we live in a society that, if we're not careful, are full of labels. When your kid goes to school, he can be in a regular class. He could be in a what they call accelerated class. You know, they have the different tiers now: lower level, medium level. So we label all the time. We just got to make sure that we're doing labeling the right way. But we label when you fill out a job application. And I've always asked myself this question: why does it matter the job application if you're white, black, green, orange? Why is that important? Because they label you. But they turn around and say, we can't discriminate or hire you because of that. But they ask you that question. So I just think about it. What kind of labels are we putting on our kids? When you tell your kid he's in a special class because he's not doing the work or whatever, you know, you're labeling your kid. Because he walks in his class and he sees 20 people just like this label you put out there. And he's with those same 20 people throughout the year. So he believes that's his lot in life. So we got to make sure, man, that the labeling, even when we talk to each other, our spouses, you know, how many times have we brought up stuff from 10 years ago? We just haven't let it go. You know, and at some point in time, you got to move on. So we got to be really careful, man, about this self-esteem thing and labels. And you can see it right here. We often witness the labeling of children. We just got finished talking about that. They do a little different, you know, not cool, corny, whatever. They get into this whole thing about labeling, and kids do it. That's what kids do. But as adults, we do the same thing. We do the same thing. Your hair is always a mess. Every time I see you, your hair is a mess. Do you ever comb your hair? You know, we say stuff like that all the time. You know, you never do anything right. You know, I said that earlier. Every time I ask you to do something, you screw it up. Then company comes over, you sit there talking about Uncle Joe and Aunt Betty and everybody else. Oh man, I asked her to do this, man. She just messes it up all the time. Your kid is hearing this. Then they go to school, something happens, and the teacher says, you know, you just not getting this. You know, I don't know what to do with you. So how do you think that kid feels? Now, how do you turn around and tell that kid, you can do anything if you put your mind to it? Or how do you even now tell the kid, just put forth 100% effort? Because you already set the bar. And the bar is, no matter what I do, is not going to be right. You know, no matter how hard I try, it's not going to be right. Your child could have studied for 3 weeks all night long and didn't do well on the test. Okay, maybe they just don't test well. That's a possibility. You know, some people freeze up when they take a test. It doesn't mean that they're slow or they're stupid or remedial. We cast those names, we label people. We label people by what they look like. She doesn't look good enough. Then if she looks really good, who she thinks she is? You know, look at her. You know, if she dresses a certain way, oh, who she thinks she is. If she dresses another way, look at her. So we do labels all the time, man. And even in front of our kids. You know, you're driving in the front seat talking about somebody, your kid's in the back seat sucking it up. You know, you talking about Aunt Bessie, your Uncle Bud, you know, your kids are lapping it up, man. You know, man, Uncle Bud got into another accident. He always screwing something up. He been to screw up everything since we were little kids. Your kids hear this stuff. You know, we're sowing seeds into our kids, man, that's going into that memory bank. So we got to make sure, man, that we are not labeling, but we're saying good stuff. You know, for instance, you could tell your kid, you know, you look nice today. Did a good job picking out your clothes. You know, my grandson does something well. I say, yo, good job. You know, give me a thumbs up. He'll give me a thumbs up. You know, we have those conversations at 4. My kids are grown. We still have those conversations. You know, my son called me up the other day. He was having a problem because he had to fire somebody. We went through the process. That don't happen unless we were having conversations when we were younger, when he was younger, to get to that point. You know, if they got an issue with relationships or whatever, they call me up. Or they'll come over. We have those conversations. Because I established it when they were younger that we could have those type of conversations. because they know I'm not going to think less of them because they have an issue. So we got to make sure, man, that we're building our kids up. Because again, if you take, for instance, something that happened in the school and they'll label it the whole school. It's the whole school. You know, they don't say it's 2 or 3 people in a school. It's Norristown High, it's Cheltenham High, it's Stewart. They label the whole school. And you got to remember, your kids are in there and they're exposed to the media just like we are. So we got to make sure, man, that we're counteracting whatever's happening out there, man. You know, and we looked at some of the labels here. Rude, has a bad attitude, easy distracted, stubborn, difficult, willful, oversensitive, overactive, and wild. It's a negative label. And it's funny because, you know, I look at some of the things on here when I look at this list, and it's funny, if you have money, some of those same labels are not as bad. You know, it's funny because, you know, they're saying he's rude. When you got money, you're aggressive. There's a whole different conversation people have when you got money. You know, hey, you know, that's what they do, you know. Bad attitude. When you got money, you're just having a tough day. He or she has a lot on their mind. I've been in rooms where I've heard these when they describe people totally different. And I'm talking about neighbors. I'm not talking about wealth. I'm talking about just kids from different neighborhoods. So that's why it's important that we understand, man, you know, and they positive, honest, knows what she wants, perceptive, independent, spirited, strong, very responsive, energetic, and busy. So we see these labels here. They're positive labels, and there's so much more you can tell your son or daughter. You know, you can tell them they're pretty. You can tell them they're handsome. You can tell them they're smart. You can tell them that, guess what? You don't have to be like everybody else to be successful. You know, you can find your own niche to be successful. When I said I wanted to do this, people laughed at me and said, this wasn't even a job. They were like, what are you doing? And I was in corporate America making 6 figures when I left to do this. And people thought I was crazy. They was like, what are you doing, man? You know, I knew I don't like working for people. So I knew that. You know, I wanted to be my own boss. I knew that. And what can I do? What can I get paid at that I really like to do that I'm not going to get up and it becomes drudgery? This is it. So even when COVID hit, people were like, man, you know, you're going to crash and burn. You can't be, you know, oh, yeah, I told you. So you know what I did? I just went virtual. So go back to that 7th grade, in the 7th grade when the teacher told me that I talked too much or I couldn't do it. You see how those decisions, you shared your decision about whether you about medical school or not, it makes a difference. And at the time when those decisions happen, we don't think about it. We don't think about how important it is. And then years later, we think about, well, what if? You know, now because you're older, you're smarter, hopefully you think, I could have did that. You know, maybe I could apply myself differently. You know, because I don't know many people, I'm not saying everybody, but most people I know didn't give 150% in high school. You know, most of the people become better students when they get to college. You know, and when you get, like, I was a much better student when I got my master's than I was when I went to college. Because I didn't really take it seriously when I was in college. I was playing ball, I was doing all this other stuff. You know, when I was paying my master's, and I'm paying for it now, I was a student. I was a much better student. So I think we got to make sure, man, that we don't allow people's opinions of us to change or to change us. Here's 10 ways. Put your child in a situation they have a high potential for success. That's not just your child, that's you. That's your relationship. Don't set it up to fail. You know, don't try to win everything at once. You know, baby steps. You know, maybe they just start coloring and, you know, you try to teach them the color between the lines. You know, that's a success. You know, you try to teach them to tie shoes and the first 20 times they fly apart, you know, you go at it, you stare, celebrate the success. Even in your personal lives, never get to the point where you can't celebrate your victories because they're important. Because they build confidence for you to do other things. Celebrate you graduate something, you do something, celebrate it. You get a promotion, I'm not saying throw a big party, but if you don't celebrate yourself, who will? And the more successes you have, the more confident you become. There was a lady sat there last week and she was saying how she's back in school now. She had her 3 boys with her. She's back in school and she was a little hesitant at first, and you know, because she working, she decided to go back to school. Now her sons are saying, yo, we want to go to college too. That's how this works. Because the see is not what you say, is what you do. Because if mom can work a full-time job and go to college and get a bachelor's degree, I can go to school during the day. And I don't have a job. If mom can handle college at this age, because you know how they look at us, I can handle it. So it's important that we lead by example. But set them up early so they can be successful. Expect your child to succeed in small, specific situations. I always say this. You should do nothing in life without expectations. My kids knew what the expectations were when they were growing up. Simple. You go to school every day, you get the best grades you can possibly get, you stay out of trouble. Everything else, I got. If there's a problem with a teacher, that's on me. Money, you got to earn stuff, that's on me. I deal with all that. In your relationship, do you have expectations in your relationship? You know, I sit down with couples and we counsel and we talk, and a lot of times couples have no expectations. You know, we in love. So, you know, you got a mess who marries a mess, so now you got a big mess. You know, because there's no expectations. Expectations, yo, I expect you to come home every night. You know, I expect you to pay your fair share for the bills. And you model that for your kids. You know, I expect you to treat me with respect. You know, my wife and I, we have rules. We don't touch each other. We don't call each other our names. Simple. No matter what happens. And you got to set those expectations. Have expectations for yourself. What do you expect from yourself? You know, because once you cover those 3 areas, it gets easier with your kids because you're modeling it right in front of them. You're living it out in front of them. If your child doesn't succeed, explore the problem, solve, you know, undermining his or her success. We got to make sure, man, that we talked about that, about how we approach them. People tell me, now see, people says, well, you know, there's no such thing as failure. That's a lie from the pit of hell. There's a such thing as failure. Now, the difference is you fail and you quit and you never try again, or you fail and you learn from your mistakes. We got to teach our kids to learn from their mistakes. Just because you fail doesn't make you a failure. And we got to remember that. That's like saying you got one bad relationship, so now you just terrible at relationships. No. Some of us will eat at the same restaurant and get bad service 5 out of 10 times, but we go back to the same restaurant. No questions. But we'll keep going back. But yet when it comes to life and our kids, we don't teach our kids that, yo, you got to keep going back until you get it right. We got to make sure, man, that we helping them understand that. When you see your child behave in a desired way, praise them for acknowledging the conduct. I always say this, don't be that parent that the only time you talk to your kids when they do something wrong. Don't be that parent. That's the only time you address your kids when they do something wrong. Hey, that's a great job. Hey, you know, I appreciate that. I appreciate the effort. Hey, thanks for putting out the trash. You know, you can have those things, have those conversations with your kids and your significant other. You know, just like he should be saying to you, you should be saying to him, hey, thank you when they do something. You're welcome. I appreciate that. Let people know. A lot of relationships struggle, and then when it's coming to an end, then they both want to say how they feel. Well, you know, I've always, you know, well, you should have said that 6 years ago. So just make sure you're doing that with your kids. Acknowledge them. Tell someone about your child's achievement. Be sure your child can hear you. Brag about them. Brag about them. You know, and who cares what people say? Because I got news for you. If your child was a juvenile delinquent, did something crazy, they be talking about him. And you too. So brag about your child. Hey, my child did well today. You know, and say it in front of them. Let them know you're proud of them. Act in the way you want your child to act. We said that, lead by example. Show respect to the child's feelings and opinions, even though you might not agree with them. One thing I always say, and this goes back to communication. Even when I knew my kids weren't telling me the truth, I never cut them off. I always let them finish talking. Because I didn't want them to grow up to be adults and not talking to me. I didn't want them to grow up and feel like they weren't being heard. Because a lot of our kids, that's the number one thing they say is nobody's listening to me. Nobody pays attention to me. You know, somebody asks me a question, the parent, before I can get it out, they telling me to shut up. So after a while, I just don't respond. I hear it all the time when I'm talking to young people. So make sure, man, that you respect them. Be careful to give your comments on their strengths as well as challenge areas. Make sure you're telling them, to me always, my theory is encourage them in their strengths and challenge them in their weaknesses. How can we get better? You know, don't destroy them, you know, but how can we get better? And I always use we because we are a team. You should be helping your kids get better. Not how can you get better, how can we get better? What can I do to help you get better? You know, because you're in this together. You know, it's just like in a relationship. Both you're in this relationship together. Be patient and consider understanding adults, and children have bad days, and they do. You know, children have bad days just like we do. I know sometimes as adults we think that kids don't have bad days, but they do. You know, the young lady in the back talked about it, man. Maybe they're having a bad day in class. You know, maybe the teacher and them got into it, and they come home, you know, and you jump on them right away. Before you even say, hey, how you doing? How was your day today? You know, you go right in. You know, I used to tell my wife all the time, because they would maybe leave a TV on or something in the morning, and soon they come in the door. And my thing was, you can still talk about that after dinner. It ain't gonna change. You can wait 15 minutes. You know, you can wait 30 minutes before you go in on them, because it's not gonna go away. You know, make sure we understand it about our kids, because they're human beings. They're human beings. Remember, each day is a new day. Each day is a reset. Each day is a day that we get to start all over. And you gotta remember that, man. Kids are like sponges, and I talked about the blank canvas. You know, and we have an opportunity, man, to kind of help them grow if we nurture them, if we talk to them, if we invest in them, and if we challenge them and we set expectations. They can turn to be pretty special adults, man.